My husband finally went no contact with his toxic mother and sister after they shamelessly demanded that we give up our dream home, something we worked years to afford, so my unemployed sister-in-law, her deadbeat gaming addict husband, and their 6 unruly kids could move in. That was the final straw, and he made it clear we're done being their backup plan. My husband and I have been navigating a strained relationship with his family, and it's really started to impact my own peace of mind. Growing up, Jacob was the favored child, practically glued to his mother. He's told me that with his father often away for work, his mother and he spent a lot of time together. It's obvious to me, though, that his sister, Sarah, didn't receive the same kind of attention from my mother-in-law. While I'm sure she loves both her children, I've consistently seen how much she dotes on Jacob. I imagine Sarah must have felt this favoritism keenly throughout her childhood. That's likely why Jacob always tried to be the best big brother, always there for her. But honestly, there were times when both Sarah and my mother-in-law acted in ways that simply crossed a line. For instance, early in our relationship, Jacob, fresh out of college, lived in the same house as his parents and Sarah. His parents had given him an entire floor to himself, ensuring his privacy and allowing him to have guests over. This meant I'd sometimes stay the night. However, on numerous mornings, Sarah would just burst into our room while we were still asleep. No knock, no warning. As you can imagine, we weren't always properly dressed, but she'd act as if it were completely normal, launching into conversations with Jacob about the most random things. It was incredibly unsettling for me, especially finding myself in my sleepwear with her just there. I understand Jacob lived with his family at the time, and I should have perhaps anticipated some things. But is asking for a simple knock before entering a room really too much? Siblings can be incredibly close, I get that, but Sarah and I barely knew each other when Jacob and I started dating, and I found her behavior deeply disrespectful. Naturally, I spoke to Jacob about it. I told him I wouldn't be staying over unless he put a lock on his door. He agreed, but as you can guess, Sarah tried to burst in the next morning and, finding the door locked, started yelling at us. She rattled the handle and banged on the door, demanding her brother let her in. Jacob eventually let her in, and she stormed into the room, demanding to know why he'd installed the lock. When she saw me, she actually pointed and started shouting at him, asking if it was because of this skank. I was stunned by her rudeness. Jacob told her it was his idea to install the lock, but Sarah wasn't convinced. She angrily told him they were siblings and shouldn't have secrets. Jacob explained he had no secrets. He just wanted the lock so she wouldn't walk in on us while we were sleeping, as it was very disruptive. Hearing this, Sarah snapped her head towards me and yelled that it was all my fault, that I was coming between her and her brother. All of this was a lot for me, as I tend to avoid confrontation. So, I excused myself to the bathroom. I could still hear her shouting and Jacob trying to calm her down. When she finally left, he came to comfort me. He was very sorry for her behavior and promised to talk to her again to ensure she apologized to me. The following weekend, she did apologize, offering a flimsy excuse about needing to talk to Jacob urgently, which she thought justified her intrusion. Jacob firmly told her not to disturb us again, and she nodded meekly. Even though that specific issue was resolved, it wasn't her only odd behavior towards Jacob. If Jacob and I disagreed on something, even small things like movies, and Sarah was around, she'd start telling him he should date someone with similar tastes, and that we were clearly wrong for each other. Jacob would give her a disapproving look, but she'd just smirk. Another time, she'd ask me awkward questions about my past, trying to pry into my life. Jacob and I had always been open with each other about our pasts, but I wasn't comfortable sharing details with his sister. Regardless of my feelings, she'd ask things like, "Why did your ex break up with you? Weren't you good enough for him?" Or make comments like, "My brother's past girlfriend was so much prettier than you." These questions and remarks always happened when we were alone. I slowly began to suspect she was trying to play some kind of game to belittle me. Initially, I bit my tongue, but as it continued day after day, one day I'd simply had enough. I responded to her taunt by saying I liked my ex-boyfriend's family more than Jacob's, because my ex didn't have nosy, overbearing family members. Sarah looked surprised by my reaction, and it seemed to shut her up for a while. What I said was essentially true. Even though Sarah had a strange dynamic with my husband, my mother-in-law was no better. When I first came into Jacob's life, she'd ignore me, But once she realized Jacob and I were getting serious, she started acting like I was trying to steal her son away. She'd deliberately ignore me at dinner or during family gatherings, acting as if I didn't exist. Jacob sometimes noticed this and tried to talk to her about it, but she never changed. My mother-in-law even once called me stuck up and spoiled just because my parents sent me to a private school and she was a public school teacher. I even know she tried to talk Jacob out of marrying me, telling him to keep looking for a better partner. Fortunately, my husband didn't care for her opinion and proposed to me anyway. When my mother-in-law and Sarah found out he'd proposed, they freaked out. Both of them called me to say that perhaps this was a bad decision, and since Jacob wouldn't listen to them, I should end the relationship and return the ring. I found it incredibly strange and refused, telling them they were out of line asking me to do something like that when I loved Jacob and wanted to spend my life with him. When they realized they couldn't convince me, my mother-in-law changed her tune and begrudgingly told me I should strive to be the best wife for him and take care of him the way she had all these years. I was a bit offended, but tried not to dwell on her words. Sarah, on the other hand, told me I was clearly just a gold digger and that her brother deserved someone much more of his status. She threatened to expose me before our marriage to ensure Jacob never married me. After this conversation, I immediately spoke to Jacob about everything, and he was taken aback by how rude they were towards me. He argued with them about it, but both his mother and sister stuck to their view that I wasn't good enough for him. He told me to ignore them and that he loved me regardless of what they thought. While his words were comforting, I still felt bad that his own family wouldn't accept me. Jacob and I had already decided to pay for our own wedding, so when my mother-in-law offered to pay for half our expenses, we graciously declined, with Jacob explaining how hard we'd worked to save for this occasion. Instead of being happy for us, this made her even more upset, and she started telling Jacob how sad she was that he didn't need her anymore. Jacob's father, however, seemed very proud of us. Unlike his sister and mother, he was quite reasonable and never had a problem with our relationship. Since my mother-in-law kept complaining to Jacob, we compromised by telling her we'd love it if she wanted to organize the rehearsal dinner for us. She agreed, and we appreciated the gesture. However, as the wedding approached, things took an unexpected turn. The first incident was when Sarah invited herself to dinner with us, telling Jacob how much she missed him. By this time, Jacob and I were living on our own after our engagement, so we thought she genuinely wanted to spend time with her brother. We agreed. Jacob specifically asked me if I was okay with having dinner with her, and I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to be rude to my future sister-in-law. While we were enjoying a nice meal, Sarah, seemingly out of nowhere, started talking about how she absolutely detested cheating partners and that cheaters were nothing but worthless. We looked at her curiously, wondering where she was going with this, when Sarah looked me directly in the face and asked me how it felt to be a worthless person. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and then Sarah began to yell, accusing me of having an affair with my coworker, Zach. Jacob asked her what she meant, and Sarah triumphantly started pulling out pictures of me and one of my coworkers, waving them around and insisting she'd caught me red-handed. I knew I'd never been unfaithful to Jacob since we started dating, so I was curious why she thought I was having an affair with my coworker. Looking at the pictures, they seemed quite harmless. It's true Zach and I were close coworkers, but only because we both started at the company at the same time and helped each other to avoid reprimands from our boss. Zach even had a girlfriend, and Jacob knew about her. I don't have a lock on my phone and had always been upfront with Jacob about all my coworkers. These casual moments captured in the photos were twisted by my sister-in-law into something they weren't, evidence of an imaginary affair. In reality, it was far from her unfounded accusations, and I felt a surge of annoyance at her attempts to tarnish my integrity and strain my relationship with Jacob. Before I could speak to defend myself, Jacob, shocked and visibly upset, intervened. He asked Sarah why she was following me around and taking pictures of me with my coworkers in various public places without anyone's consent. Sarah, hearing this, started justifying that she only wanted to investigate me since I wasn't of their status, and she was afraid I was marrying him for his money. Jacob firmly told Sarah that her claims were baseless and that she was creating unnecessary drama out of nothing. He tried to reason with her, asking her to stop spreading lies and trying to harm our relationship, but Sarah kept yelling that he should open his eyes to the obvious affair that was going on. I also tried to tell her we were just co-workers, but she vehemently stuck to her statements. The atmosphere grew tense as her accusations intensified. I had enough of her accusations and yelling, so I told Sarah I was going to file a police report against her for illegally taking my pictures and stalking me. Her expression turned to one of pure fear as she looked at me and asked if I was serious. I told her I clearly had all the evidence, and she had deliberately stalked me and taken these photographs of me with my coworkers without my consent, trying to defame me with ridiculous lies. Sarah looked at Jacob and then me and started to plead that this was all just to protect her brother, and she didn't think it was such a big deal. She started to beg Jacob to talk to me since she had done all this for him, and if I filed a case, it would harm her work and her future. I firmly told Sarah that only she could save herself at this point. Sarah asked me what it was that I wanted, and I told her that I was not going to file a case against her as long as she stayed far away from my life. At this point, there was nothing Sarah could do to escape this situation. She looked at her brother, but Jacob supported me and told her she should be grateful that I was willing to let this go since what she had done was clearly wrong. Sarah reluctantly agreed to stay away from me, and since that day, she and I haven't spoken. Jacob continues to have a relationship with her, but she has never dared to talk to me after that. Now, the second incident that occurred just the night before our wedding was during our rehearsal dinner. My mother-in-law, who had insisted on taking responsibility for our rehearsal dinner, declined our offer to help her in any way leading up to the event and told us she was going to take care of it. However, upon arrival, it became evident that the preparations were not as anticipated. The rehearsal dinner turned out to be a collection of plastic tablecloths on picnic tables and cold Mexican food. During dinner, she kept acting upset, making the whole celebration feel a bit off. She got drunk and started behaving inappropriately with the other guests, saying she couldn't wait for the wedding stuff to be over and how stressful it had been, even though she didn't contribute financially or in any planning. Eventually, my father got fed up and escorted her out. My sister-in-law tried to protest, attempting to justify her mother's behavior, but my father refused to listen to her. As you can imagine, it was a complete disaster, and I started fretting that both these women would somehow ruin my wedding the next day as well. That night, Jacob and I had our first fight. I told him firmly that he needed to uninvite both Sarah and his mother, since with the way they were behaving, they would definitely do something to upstage us during the wedding. My husband vehemently refused and tried to assure me that my father would be there and wouldn't let them get away with anything. I then had to threaten Jacob that if he didn't uninvite his mother and sister, there would be no wedding the next day. Jacob was visibly shocked by my demand, and I knew exactly how I sounded, but I was anxious thinking about what these women would be up to. I didn't want to be embarrassed again in front of my family and friends on my wedding day. Jacob clearly didn't have strong boundaries, but I hoped with this ultimatum he would understand just how much they were starting to affect our relationship. Thankfully, Jacob did understand and made the right choice. He called his dad early in the morning and let him know that his mother and sister were uninvited. His dad didn't even seem surprised and assured him that he would make sure that his mother and Sarah wouldn't show up uninvited. After a few moments of our conversation with his dad, his mother and Sarah started calling Jacob continuously, clearly to convince him to let them come to his wedding. But Jacob firmly told them that, after how they behaved with me throughout our relationship, he didn't feel comfortable with them there during the wedding. Hearing this, his mother started telling him what a bad woman I was for coming between him and his mother, and Sarah tried to reason with him as well, but Jacob stood his ground. I did feel bad that his dad couldn't come to our wedding because of his wife and daughter, and believe me, I felt terrible for my ultimatum. But all my guilty feelings vanished when I later learned from some of Jacob's cousins that Sarah and his mother had planned on wearing white dresses to our wedding. They told me how they all had a family WhatsApp group for female members only, and in this group, Sarah had encouraged others to wear white, saying there was no reason for the bride to be the only one wearing white. I was shocked at how low they could go just to hurt me. After learning of this, I was glad they were uninvited. Jacob did miss his family, but he also understood where I was coming from. Overall, we had a great wedding, and no one tried to upstage us. Since that day, his mother and Sarah stopped talking to me completely, which I was very happy about and perfectly comfortable with. They would only invite my husband over for dinner or on special occasions, which I didn't mind terribly. His father, on the other hand, was kind to me, and we continued to stay in touch over the years. Jacob and I meticulously saved our money and eventually bought a new house this year. It's our very first home, and as you can imagine, we were very excited about finally owning something this significant. His parents and Sarah did come to visit our place for a small housewarming celebration, and on that day, to avoid them, I visited my parents and spent some time with my family. Now, coming to the main issue. Last month, out of the blue, my mother-in-law called me. This was completely unexpected, as she and I haven't spoken since the day I married Jacob. Surprisingly, she casually asked me how I had been and how my life was going. I was a bit taken aback by her sudden interest, but I answered her questions. Anyway, then she started asking how it felt to live in such a huge house when it was just me and Jacob. Her words stung because Jacob and I had been wanting to get pregnant for a long time, but due to some infertility issues, I was unable to get pregnant. Jacob knew about this, and although we mourned that we might never have children of our own, we had eventually accepted it. I had told Jacob several times when I first found out the news that he was welcome to divorce me if he wanted to, so he could eventually marry someone else and have his own children. But Jacob had always stood by me. He loved me and told me that it was okay for us to be childless as long as we had each other. Obviously, our families also knew about this, which is why my mother-in-law subtly commented about it. She then went on to inform me that my sister-in-law was pregnant. I was shocked to hear this, as this was going to be her sixth child. I had heard from Jacob how jobless her husband was and didn't believe in using contraception, which would lead to these accidental pregnancies. Sarah's partner was the epitome of laziness and did nothing around the house to help her or the kids. I have heard from Jacob that he treats Sarah like his personal maid. He never even pays any bills around the house. Sarah works multiple part-time jobs while he spends the whole day gaming. Despite how much everyone has talked with her, Sarah never leaves him. My mother-in-law then continued saying that since Sarah could no longer afford to keep working throughout her pregnancy, she thought it would be a good idea for me and Jacob to give up our place since it was too big for a childless couple like us. I was taken aback by her demand and struggled to form words. I asked her if she was joking with me, but my mother-in-law went on to say that she was, in fact, very serious and that Sarah and her husband deserved to live in a bigger house. But since she did not have space at her own house to let them move in, she had asked them to move in with us. The weight of this announcement hung in the air, and I found myself trying to compose a response amidst the whirlwind of emotions that now enveloped me. I explained to her that this was our house, which we were still paying for. The notion of someone else moving in with us so abruptly, without even asking for our permission, was intrusive and ridiculous. However, my mother-in-law then insisted that she had already talked with Jacob, and he had agreed with this. This seemed bizarre, as Jacob and I always shared everything with each other, and I knew for sure that he would have definitely told me the news if he had agreed to let his sister and her family stay with us. I firmly told my mother-in-law that since the house belonged to both me and Jacob, he couldn't give permission all on his own without my consent. No one was allowed to live here with us without both of us agreeing to it. To compromise, I told her I would be happy to host Sarah and her husband for a few days if that's what they wanted, but I wouldn't allow them to move in with me. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, started to yell at me that making space for my sister-in-law and her husband was expected of me as a dutiful daughter-in-law, and if I agreed to her demands, all our past issues would be forgiven. So, in anger, I replied to her, "Sure, I will be happy to let them have our place, but you see, we are still paying for this place, and I know that if Sarah and her husband move in, they won't be helping us with the mortgage or the bills. Hence, I think you should take some responsibility and help pay for Sarah, her husband, and her children to live in our house. I will be happy if you can pay just the mortgage for us, and we can cover the bills for everyone. I know that you won't be able to pay the mortgage with just the one job you have, so tell me, when are you getting a second job to pay off the debt?" My mother-in-law, hearing this, erupted in a fit of rage, shouting and expressing her displeasure. She told me it was ridiculous of me to ask her to pay the mortgage for us, and I retorted that it was equally ridiculous for her to expect us to take care of Sarah's family and to let them move in. This infuriated her even more, and she continued to yell while I smiled in satisfaction. She disconnected the call when she realized I wasn't going to give in to her demands. Soon after, my sister-in-law called, yelling at me for daring to ask her mother to pay our mortgage. She continued saying how she always knew that I was just a gold digger, and I told her that it was she who was being a gold digger for trying to live with us. And if she ever wanted to see who the real gold digger in the family was, then she needed to look at her own partner who did nothing to help her out. This seemed to shut her up. I firmly told her that she could bicker with me all she wanted, but I am never allowing her family into our house unless they wanted to help us with our mortgage. She accused me of being heartless and prioritizing money over family. The tables had turned, and I felt relieved at the prospect of standing up for myself and not backing down, regaining control of my home. However, I do feel a bit guilty thinking about my husband's side of the family, and I'm wondering if what I've done makes me unreasonable. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who has shown their support for me. To answer the most important question that everyone keeps asking, why would my mother-in-law even demand such a ridiculous thing from us? It's because my mother-in-law has always been this entitled. Clearly, my husband has let this charade go on for far too long, and he and I need to sit down and have a serious talk about this. It's pathetic how my mother-in-law can lie about her own son just to get her own way. My sister-in-law is just a pawn in her play who goes along with whatever her mom wants because my mother-in-law has always heavily favored my husband. Sarah just listens to whatever her mommy says in the hopes that she favors her as well. In this case, Sarah stood to gain from this situation since she could depend on us to pay for her bills and take care of her children while her worthless husband would do nothing. I am waiting for my husband to be back from his business trip so we can talk. I don't want to discuss this over the phone with him since it's too important. Update 2. It's been 3 days since my last update. As I had mentioned earlier, I was waiting for my husband to be back. When he returned and we could finally sit down and talk, I told him about how his mother had called me, demanding that we give up our house for his sister and her family. Jacob was clearly taken aback hearing this, and I went on to tell him the entire story. He then confessed that he had no idea about all this, and that the only thing his mother had told him before he went on the trip was that his sister was pregnant. That's all he knew about the situation, and he had no idea that she would make such ridiculous demands. I told him firmly that I expected him to talk to his mother regarding this and deal with the situation since I can't handle his family, and he agreed. He called his mother in front of me and asked her why she had lied to me about him. Caught red-handed, his mother tried to backtrack, saying that she didn't exactly lie and that she knew he would have no problem with his sister living with us. So she had decided to take matters into her own hands and asked me directly. Jacob stopped her mid-sentence and asked her why she assumed that he would have no problem with Sarah and her entire family moving in. His mother told him that he and Sarah were close, so obviously that would mean that he would have liked to help her out by allowing her family to move in. Hearing this, I closed my eyes in frustration, but I kept my mouth shut since Jacob needed to handle his mother. My husband then firmly told her that there was no way that he was letting Sarah, her jobless husband, and her 6 children move in with us, and that she had no right to force us to take care of them. His mother started yelling that Sarah really needed someone at this point, but my husband told her that it wasn't our responsibility and that if she wanted, then she should take care of Sarah. His mother then began to say how his dad didn't want that and that their house was too small, but we were living in such a huge house, so we could easily help out Sarah. She even went on to say since I was childless anyway, I could help Sarah's kids, and this would make me feel fulfilled. My eyes widened in shock, but for the first time, I watched my husband's face change color. He yelled back at her that she had no right to say something so insensitive about me, and that she couldn't use that against me to force me to take care of Sarah's children. He continued telling her that his dad rightfully didn't want anything to do with Sarah since she had become like a childbirthing machine, and that he was done with the both of them. His mother tried to backtrack, but Jacob continued to yell at her that he had tried his best to have a good relationship with them even after they had continuously disrespected me, but he couldn't take this anymore. His mother started begging him, but Jacob told her that this was our house and I was his wife, and anyone who disrespected me disrespected him as well and didn't deserve to stay in his life. With those final words, Jacob ended the call. Since then, he has had no contact with both Sarah and his mother. His dad did call to talk to him, but after learning of the entire incident, he understood exactly why Jacob had taken such a drastic decision. His dad talked and apologized to me on behalf of his wife, but I told him that it wasn't his fault anyway. Update 3. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. A lot of people suggested I install cameras around my place just in case his mother and Sarah decided to show up and create a scene, so I did order them online and installed them all around my place. Well, as luck would have it, they did decide to show up last weekend, knocking on my door while I was all alone. When I saw they were here from my camera, I called Jacob immediately, and he said he was on his way. When I opened the door, there they were, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, looking furious. They demanded I let them in, but I stood my ground, refusing to allow them entry and telling them that if they had anything to talk about, they could talk to me from outside. His mother started yelling about how heartless I was, accusing me of being greedy and selfish. I calmly told her that this was our home, and they had no right to barge in uninvited. His mother continued her tirade, unaware of the cameras capturing every moment. I calmly reminded her of our previous conversation, reiterating that I would not be giving up my home for Sarah and her husband, and that if she had anything further to talk about, she should wait for Jacob to come back home. Sarah, in turn, started to yell that I was breaking up the family for no reason and that I was being too stubborn. She told me that not only was I a gold digger like she had always known, but now I was trying to take her brother away from them. I then informed them that whatever they were saying was being recorded on our cameras and that I would be using this evidence to get a restraining order against them, so next time they couldn't come within 50 feet of our house. Their eyes widened in shock, and his mother yelled that I wouldn't dare to do that. I smirked at her and told her that if they didn't get off our property this very minute, she would be receiving a legal order very soon. This scared them straight, and my sister-in-law started to say how I was overreacting and that it wasn't a big deal. Fortunately, at this point, Jacob arrived. He walked towards us calmly and asked his mother what they were doing there. His mother rushed to hug him, but he deflected her and asked her firmly again what she and Sarah were doing here. Sarah started to say that they knew that it was me who was trying to control his life by not letting him talk to us, and that they had come here to confront me. I rolled my eyes at how absurd they both sounded. Jacob clarified to both of them that it was he who had made the decision to go no contact and that he did not want anything to do with the both of them. His mother started to beg him at this point to forgive her, but he simply asked them to leave the property or he would have no choice but to call the police. Their eyes widened in shock. Clearly, both of them had not expected this reaction from him. Jacob went on to tell them that if they ever showed up at our house again, then he and I would be free to call the police on them and have them removed forcefully. They looked devastated, but Jacob didn't care anymore. I felt relieved that my husband was finally standing up for me. Eventually, both of them left, still fuming. Since then, Jacob has talked with his dad also, who was as shocked as us that his mother and Sarah had gone behind his back to show up at our house unannounced. He assured us that we were right not to let them in. He is also becoming increasingly frustrated with their behavior. I know that with Jacob being so firm about it and kicking them out, they will not dare set foot on our property ever again. If they do, well, I will contact a lawyer and send them a notice immediately. I am glad that my husband has finally realized how toxic his family is, and hopefully, they won't trouble us anymore so we can peacefully live our lives. I hope this is my last update since I want to move on from this situation as well.